Thank you very much to Tom and Jan for allowing me to speak this evening. It's kind of awesome company. I'm very aware that we have people who are truly experts on Herodotus and some who've probably never read any Herodotus at all. And we've also got in the room one or two very expert marathon runners and historians, etc. And people again, probably like myself, who don't know too much about that side of it. So I'm aware of trying to ride sort of all of those horses and keep everyone on board. It's a fun story, this. How I got into this story is its own story, which I won't spend time on. You can ask me afterwards if you like. But I'm writing a book for Bloomsbury. I'll put details on the final slide, which is going to be called the Marathon and Epic History, which is coming out in hopefully March next year, as long as I get my skates on. And it's really trying to work out how we get from an ancient battle to a modern sporting craze. And probably as a place saver, I mean, it's worth thinking for the classicists in the room and the Herodoteans in the room. The word marathon with the word Olympic or Olympics is the two best known ancient Greek words worldwide, because words like philosophy that come into all the European languages, they don't go into Mandarin, for example. But probably apart from remote tribal societies, the word marathon is known in every corner of the world. It's an astonishing idea. A small seaside township village in Greece has given us this word, and some of you, but not many perhaps, will be aware that it just originally meant fennel. So you can see some of the stats. London and New York are in an arms race to try and get to 60,000. They keep upping each other. Watch out for the 26th of April, I think, this year, because I think London might top 60,000 finishers. But this has grown massively since the 1970s, the marathon. And it's, I think, probably from a classicist point of view and a Herodotus loving point of view, we have an opportunity here. It's like, well, where does this story start? And also, possibly also, now that it's such a huge thing, a responsibility to try and, educate a little bit and understand. And when I started the story, I had a whole set of assumptions, and they've been blown out of the water. Well, let's dive in. So, I would like to start with an article that I read, came across in the London Times last summer in August. And whenever I see a marathon article, I obviously kind of my ears prick up and what have you. And this is an article by a guy called Henry Bird, who has devised a running route that stops at London's best bakeries. So it's a kind of nice puff piece article. Jan was just saying that we need lots of good news at the moment. It's that kind of article. And it starts like this. When the Athenian courier Pheidippides completed his mythic run from the Battle of Marathon to Athens in 490 BC, he supposedly brought news of the Greek army's victory over the invading Persians. According to Robert Browning's poetic retelling of the story, he managed to croak out, "Athens is saved," before promptly collapsing and dying. And so the marathon was born. And then he carries on in the same kind of vein. Now, we should first of all point out that actually Pheidippides has got nothing. This story's got nothing to do with finding good bakeries on the London Marathon route. This is literally just a hook to get you reading the story. So that tells you something already. And this is about as much as you'll ever get. It's interesting, I say to people, "What do you know about the origin story?" And most people wouldn't even be able to tell you this much. But what I'm going to do now, I might have one or two former students on this call, is imagine that I'm an ancient history teacher in the UK system at A level, that's kind of when they're 17, and critique this a little bit. Imagine if a student's handed this in to me, and how would I kind of give feedback on this paragraph? And I like him being called a courier, a runner, that's good. Pheidippides, fine, we'll come on to that. I like the fact that can't find my, how can I use a, no, I can't see how to use a pointer here. But I like the fact that he describes it as mythic and supposedly. That's a healthy skepticism there. I like the fact that it's the Greek army and not the Athenian army, because the Plataeans managed to get in there, and they're often written out by the ancient Athenians. And then we come to Robert Browning. Now, there's 2 points here. First of all, the final words in the Robert Browning poem are not "Athens is saved." it's rejoice we conquer. So whether you're a student at school or you're a Times journalist, that is a howler, I'm afraid. He needed to read on 3 lines. So not good from the Times, I'm afraid there. But this mention of Browning is interesting because although Henry Bird here doesn't say Browning was the person, the poem of Browning, the Pheidippides poem of Browning about these two stories actually, um, is where the marathon idea came from. This is basically what you read in almost every book. That this man, Michel Bréal, who's a famous linguist, he invented semantics. He's Franco-German. He's living in Paris. He's a great academic, very well known in his day in the late 19th century, that he read a poem by Robert Browning, and that gave him the idea just at the time that the Olympics were being refounded, the foundation of the IOC in 1894. I hope everyone in the room knows there was no ancient marathon, or perhaps I should have said that as well, at the Olympics. So that was my starting point with Browning. And I assumed this. And the more I have gone on, the more I have become convinced that Robert Browning's got absolutely nothing to do with this whatsoever. And this is just bunkum. And I'm not usually that blunt, but the more, I mean, I can show you why. I think I'll be able to show you why. But you read this in every book, that all Bréal had to go on was a poem by Robert Browning. And this, I'm afraid, is a very Anglophone approach. These are English. I think it starts in the New York Times letters page in the 1909 or something like that. And then it's Anglo-speaking scholars, so across both sides of the ocean, who all decide that this well-known poem from 1879 is what Bréal has to read. And the implication there is that this is a sort of conversation between two very learned men. Browning knows his classics, comes up with the story, reads his ancient sources. Bréal knows his classics, reads Browning's poem, comes up with the idea at the first Olympics, which modern Olympics, which are in 1896 in Athens. And so essentially everyone else, it's a sort of conversation between scholars, and it's rubbish. And the reason it's rubbish is because this story is so widely known in the 19th century that the reason Bréal never gives an explanation for why he suggested this race is he doesn't need to, because everyone gets it. And so I want to explain why. So the Battle of Marathon, I'm going to walk straight past it, folks. Some of you will know way too much about the Battle of Marathon, and many of you will not know anything about the Battle of Marathon. There was a battle at Marathon, and there is the funeral mound on the left, famous funeral mound. We think of the dying Athenians, 192 of them, and there is a lovely scene of Marathon which conjures up Byron's poetry, which we won't be talking about today, but is very much in this story. So let's very quickly do the runs. So the first, that didn't quite sound right, did it? The first run is in Herodotus. And this goes from Athens to Sparta. Before the battle, no one dies. It's done by someone called Pheidippides, or possibly Philippides. The manuscripts say different things. We're not going to go there today, but it could be either. And he's going to run down to Sparta to ask for help. He's a highly trained runner. There's a whole class of them. I'm not going to spend much time on this today, but I'm going to spend half a chapter talking about this run in the book. Today, if you want to do, so the key thing is he gets there on the next day. So he probably does it in 36 hours, which is amazing. But they did have these highly trained runners. So if you fancy it, you can do the Spartathlon, although it's a very elite ultra marathon today. And we actually have, I think, on the call, Dino Karnatsis, who has also written a book about this run, which I highly recommend. It's a wonderful read, The Road to Sparta, about how he's a well-known ultra marathon runner, about how he reconstructed it using ancient Greek food as well. It's a brilliant tale. But this all starts in 1982. It's one of the things I learned working with the running community is that they are wonderful people, a little bit crazy at times, if I'm honest. I hope that's not too controversial. So there's a guy called John Foden. He's 52. He's reading Herodotus. He's in the RAF. He's Anglo-Australian in 1978, and he decides, God, that's an interesting story. I wonder if that can be done. So him and a team, it takes until 1982, but they set out on the Spartathlon, as they call it. They devise their route, and he's 56, and he manages to do it in 37 hours, 37 minutes. And that today is one of the world's most elite ultramarathons, the original Pheidippides run. And if you're really up for a challenge, Pheidippides then ran back, and you can do the ultimate Pheidippides run marathon, something like that. And you get 98 hours to run 306 miles. So, something to think about. That's the original run in Herodotus. So I should say, perhaps for those of you who know, I'll go on to this side as well. For those of you who don't really know Herodotus, he's writing a few decades after the battle. We're not sure exactly how many, probably starting maybe 30 years after the battle. Don't shoot me if I got that wrong. And possibly publishing 60 years or so after the battle. And so he's spoken at least to the children of those who fought. So again, I'm not being able to use the pointer, frustratingly, but what you can see here is that after the battle, this is definitely the first marathon, however you like it, because the Athenian soldiers have to get back from the marathon side to the Athens side, because although they've beaten the Persians in this amazing David versus Goliath battle, no one expected it, if you believe the sources. The Persians aren't completely routed. They get back on the ships and they're like, well, we'll try the other side of Attica. So we'll sail round. So there's a speed march back by the Athenian troops, and they get back. You can see the Herodotus here. And this is strategically crucial because they get back before the Persian ships get back, and they kind of have a face off. And the Persians are like, all right, let's head off. So that is, if you like, if you want a kind of remarkable sporting challenge after the battle, this is it. I also believe this is where the marathon runner story comes from, but that's for later. So then 600 years later, we get our first reference for ourselves to a different run. This is the run that gives us the marathon race, and it goes from Marathon to Athens. And the first source is the writer Plutarch, a biographer. And he's actually not, he's doing a piece of rhetoric here. And he talks about a guy, we've got two different names, Thesippus and Eucles. And he gives a source for Thesippus, someone who was writing in the 4th century BC, Heraclides of Pontus. And he says that this guy, whoever it was, he ran back in full armor, we'll come back to that, hot from the battle, bursts in at the doors of the first people, and could only say, rejoice, and we do rejoice. So it's very difficult. The lerb, if you're a classicist, you'll know that's the sort of a Bible of literal translation, actually likes to change this, the second, because it doesn't like kai karomen, because all it really means is something like rejoice, and we do rejoice. If anyone's got a better suggestion, I'd love to hear it. I read somewhere, it's a bit like, be happy, because today's a good day to be happy. Anyway, having done that, he dies. So he falls down dead and dies. So this is not in Herodotus. And for those of us who know and love Herodotus, I think hopefully we can all agree Herodotus would never have missed this. This is so Herodotus, this story, that if this had happened, surely he would have reported it. So on that basis alone, I think you can probably say it didn't happen. It's not the end of the story. The second source tells basically the same story, but changes it a bit. So what I should have said, sorry, about Plutarch as well, is that what he's trying to do here, it's almost a throwaway point, where what he's trying to argue, it's a piece of rhetoric, that the Athenians achieved more as soldiers than they did as thinkers, as philosophers, as artists. And so the key point for him about this runner is that he's fought in the battle and then run back to Athens. He's a soldier. And he goes on to say, if he'd been a shepherd watching the battle, it wouldn't have been interesting. It wouldn't have been impressive. It's the fact he's a soldier. So Lucian's writing a few decades later, and he changes a few things. Basic outline is the same. He changes the name to Philippides, the variant of Pheidippides. And he has him collapsing in front of the magistrates in session. Plutarch just has it in front of the first people. And we don't, there's a lovely story from 200 years ago where a painter didn't know what that meant. Is that the leading citizens, or is that the first people he meets, or is that his family? And he wrote to the Regius Professor of Greek at Oxford and Cambridge, and said, "What do you think?" And they each one sent back a different answer. So if anyone feels they've got the definitive answer, I'd love to hear it. But we just have to translate it, I think, as the first people there. But with Lucian, it's definitely the magistrates. And Lucian gives us the words that, if you know this story, you will be familiar with. Rejoice, we are victorious, or in Greek, karete nikomen. So we have differences, but we have the same outline story. 600 years plus, 650 years plus after the battle. How does this turn into a sporting craze? Well, I started at Robert Browning, and that's gone out of the window. It all starts in the 18th century. And again, for some of you, this will be very, very familiar territory, but very, very briefly for others, I've written, I think, in a book, and I'd love a scholar to correct me or beat me up for this, but I don't think until 1700, no one's reading Herodotus, certainly the Persian Wars part of Herodotus, and no one's really interested in Greek history or that interested in Roman history. The Renaissance, they're interested in the art and the literature, but the kind of chunky history, no thanks. This all changes in the 18th century with what we call the Enlightenment. There's a great focus on civil rights, nation states. We get the revolutions in America and France, which come out of this. We get the beginning of the feminist movement with Mary Wollstonecraft's text at the end of in 1792, I think. And we all part of this. There's this obsession with the Greeks, a complete obsession. And we are in an age, Tom was just, the reason I mentioned his podcast earlier is that we were talking about it's the age of podcasts. Everyone loves their history podcasts. Not least Tom Harrison, I understand. He might want to correct me on that. So in the 18th century, they didn't have podcasts, funny enough, but suddenly they really get into popular history. So you're sort of Tom Holland type character. Writing books. This is what they want to read. And they want to read partly about the Greeks. This is Gibbon's Decline and Fall period as well. But they start to get these popular histories emerging. And the first big one, and I know scholars are going to be thinking, what about Stanion? We'll come to him in a minute. But the first big one is a Frenchman. Now, this story about the marathon is a French story. It's got like a stick of rock. It's got a seam of France going all the way through it. And it starts with this man, Charles Rollin. 2 or 3 months ago, I'd never heard of him really, and he's now all over my life. Wherever I turn, I meet Charles Rollin, basically. So he's a sort of educator in France from sort of elite in the university. He believes the wrong thing about Christianity. He's a Jansenist. He believes in predestination. So he sort of gets run out of town a little bit from his academic institution. So he spends the latter years of his life writing popular histories, and particularly this one, L'Histoire ancienne, which is a history of ancient Greece. And so he does something extraordinary. At the end of the account of the Battle of Marathon, he adds in the runner story as though it's the regular part of the battle. Okay, so here we have it immediately after the battle. An Athenian soldier, still reeking with the blood of the enemy, detached himself from the army and ran with all his might to Athens to bring his fellow citizens the happy news of victory. When he arrived at the magistrate's house, he said only a few words to them, "Rejoice, we are victorious," and fell down dead at their feet. So notice here, he's actually combining the Plutarch and the Lucian, because he's a soldier, that's Plutarch, but the words are from Lucian, and he arrives at the magistrate's house. So that's very clearly in the Lucian. So also, and Dean's on the course going to be absolutely horrified by this, but he completely downgrades the original run. So for the message to Sparta to ask for help, he just says the Athenians had sent to Lacedaemon to ask for support against the common enemy. Well, that could be by carrier pigeon, could be by donkey. Okay, Pheidippides' great, amazing run, 150 miles, it's gone. What the hell's happening? So humor me a bit more here. If I kind of put my teacher hat on, I'm clearly missing this. And if a kind of a 17-year-old handed this in, this is a one-on-one chat. It's like, what the hell are you doing? You can't just throw in a 600-year later pair of sources, mix them up a bit, and not mention that they're pretty spurious, that they're at least embellished, and that they're probably fabricated. You can't just whack it in. But that's what Charles Rollin does. And that changes everything. I'm absolutely convinced now that had Roland not added in those two sentences you can see in front of you, no one would ever have run a race called a marathon. And I'll explain why. So the first thing is Roland's reach itself is huge. So you can see all of the languages. Amazingly, Bengali, 1847. But in the 18th century already, he's hugely well read, or people reading him an awful lot. But then what you also get is six other historians, popular historians, who follow him, and they really do follow him. So the scholars will know that Temple Stanyan came up with he's really the first. He comes up with a history in 1707 of Greece. It's the first popular history of Greece, really. There's one or two other, but the main one. And the marathon runner is not in the 1707, but he brings out in 1739 a much beefed up and extended one. And all of a sudden, that is in the 1739. And there must be an extent, from what I can read, that Stanyan's responding to Roland. Roland's publishing through the 1730s. He's like, oh, but it's the whole competition making things better. So Stanyan puts it in. Stanyan also gives the name Euclides, and the name Euclides is the standard name for this runner all the way up to Robert Browning's poem. So Robert Browning, what he does do is change the name. Everyone knows the runner as Euclides before this. Then you get others. So the other name I'd really pick out here is Oliver Goldsmith. His history is famous for writing the Vicar of Wakefield, but his history is the standard school book in the late 18th and early 19th century. Okay, and it's read in more languages than Roland. Now, when you get to the end of the 18th century, there's a kind of like, whoa, hang on a minute. We can't just write down anything we think, any nice source that makes a good story. So you get a more rigorous approach to history. So William Mitford's History of Greece, there's no marathon runner story. You go into the 19th century, Bulwer Lytton, no marathon runner story. George Grote, no marathon runner story. But I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, the horse is not just bolted at this point. It's not even going up the hill. It's in the next county. Everyone is now reading these popular histories and assuming that the marathon runner is part of the original narrative. Okay, so how do we know this? Well, first of all, in America, you've got this wonderful letter. So Abigail Adams, she's the wife of John Adams. I don't like introducing her as the wife of and the mother of, because actually she's a kind of founding an American founder herself. But she's also she's married to John Adams. She's the first vice president, the second president. And she's writing a letter. I've taken a very great fondness for reading Roland's ancient history since you left me. I'm determined to go through with it, if possible, in these my days of solitude. He's away in Philadelphia at this point. I find great pleasure and entertainment from it, and I have persuaded, I like that, Johnny to read me a page or two every day, and hope he will, from his desire to oblige me, entertain a fondness for it. So Johnny is John Quincy Adams, the sixth US president, 1825 to 1829. So we have presidents, future presidents reading their roller. I think even more tellingly, 1852, this is just when Grote's publishing his great monumental history. Uncle Tom's Cabin, the second second best-selling book in America in the 19th century after the Bible. And there's this really interesting quote: whoever has traveled in the New England states will remember in some cool village the large farmhouse with its clean swept grassy yard. In the family keeping room, as it is termed, he will remember the staid, respectable old bookcase with its glass doors, where Roland's History, Milton's Paradise Lost, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, and Scott's Family Bible stand side by side in decorous order, with multitudes of other books equally solemn and respectable. So this is extraordinary. None of us, I imagine, apart from some of the scholars, will have ever heard of this guy Roland and his history. But in the middle of 19th century America, he's put alongside the Bible and two absolute classics of Christian literature in a kind of Christian America. So they're all reading this stuff. So what then happens? So this is a school book published in 1819 in Britain. I love it. So it's called True Stories from Ancient History, chronologically arranged from the creation of the world to the death of Charlemagne by a mother. I love this. It's like read with mother, and she's actually called Maria Elizabeth Budden. So it's really interesting. You have a woman publishing school books or reading books, not even school books at this period. But so in her account of Marathon, it starts on the previous page. It's really, really short. And again, I can't point for some really annoying reason. I'm obviously not mastering the tech here, but if you go down four lines, the end of the fourth line there, you know, that's probably about you've got it. A soldier covered with the blood of the enemy ran to Athens with the news, and had just strength enough left to say, "Rejoice, the victory is ours," and then fell down dead from fatigue and wounds. So there we go. That's basically Roland. It was my translation of the Roland. Of course, it was in French originally, and it's then being repeated. And so Budden's book goes through 13 editions. First printed 1819. Last edition is 1867. This image comes, I think, from the 1822, which really, really annoyingly is not in the British Library. I'm so frustrated by this because it's a print. There's a print version that comes out soon afterwards. So this is a really important image, and it relates, I think, to a painting that we're about to look at. So this horse is now about 15 counties away. This is just a standard part of the narrative of the battle. Who knew? No one knew this in the ancient world. And then something else happens. So we're back in France, folks. Again, it's got nothing to do with Robert Browning. This is a French story. The Callum's on the call, and we've been emailing about this over the last few days. But in the French revolutionaries, they love the Greeks, because everyone loves the Greeks at this point. They love the Battle of Marathon. Callum suggested, well, they will love the idea of kind of citizen soldiers, farmer soldiers. It really speaks to who they want to be. And in 1791, a revolutionary commander called Pierre Bayeux, I think Tim's on the call, Tim Rood, and he actually put me onto this, so I must very much thank him for this and many other things, actually. So Pierre Bayeux, he needs to inspire his troops to go and fight some counter-revolutionaries. So what do? 1791, you read them about the Battle of Marathon. Of course you do. It's really obvious. Not to us. And I think the story grows legs in two ways here. One is it's now becomes the emblem of the battle. It's not just a standard part of the battle. It's the key moment. It's what you kind of hang your hat on. Like, what's Marathon all about? It's like, Charles Roland, what have you done? If I'm his teacher, I'm like, you can't just whack this down. Have you not listened to anything I've said about source evaluation? But no, he hasn't, because he's an old man in France and all the rest of it. And he's, probably wouldn't listen to me anyway. So we get this speech. So the kind of one of the key moments is so the other thing I was saying is you then get the story has legs in that you get a focus not just on the runner, but on those who receive the news. So you get basically non-combatants, the people back in Athens being brought into the story. Okay, so I'm going to read this to you again. Suddenly there could be glimpsed in the distance something like a dot, like a shadow which advances, which grows. The anxieties intensify. Again, translated from the French. I'm so grateful for my French A level and my friend Valerie, who I think is also on the call as well. Is he fleeing? Have we won? We can't breathe. We devour the space with our gaze. The object, it seems to be running towards us. It's approaching. We think we recognize him. It's him. His forehead covered in sweat and dust, his garment torn and bloodstained. He arrives. He cries out, "Citizens!" Very French, French revolutionary. "Victory is ours." So in French, "Nous sommes vainqueurs," and falls dead. Dead from the joy at the feet of his victorious fatherland. And then Bayeux speaks to the soldiers. Oh, who among us at this moment would not give his life for such a speech? It's amazing. And then in the final paragraph of the whole speech, he repeats "Nous sommes vainqueurs" again. So this is the emblematic moment of the Battle of Marathon for the French revolutionaries. Like, what have you done, Roland? How have you managed to achieve this? I keep getting the thought in my head of the Churchill quote about a lie being halfway around the world. It's not quite a lie, but you know what I mean? Before the truth's had time to get its pants on. So what then happens? This is when the art gets really, really interesting. And again, very grateful to Tim for pointing me in various directions here. So this is a lithograph now in the British Museum of a painting, and I think the painting's lost. If anyone's got it at home, please tell me, because I really want to see this painting. And it's an astonishing painting by this guy, Auguste Coudet, who, guess what, is French, living in Paris. Who knew that this was a French story? And again, we can see here, it's the Plutarch story in a sense, because you've got the shield there. him being a soldier. But look at the woman coming in on the right. So that bio idea of having the non-combatants brought into the story, Cude brings in the wife. Okay, now she doesn't exist in the ancient sources, but we now have a kind of wife, a love interest with this story. She's kind of reaching forward. Look also, I wish I could point, but I can't, at the men in the middle pointing to heaven. And look also at the women over on the left by the left-hand column praying. It's a very Christian scene. Um, and so, it's amazing. And again, it's why is this coming out? It's what I need to say for those of you who don't know much about the Battle of Marathon. In the 19th century, the Battle of Marathon, they become obsessed by it. It becomes the battle that changes the world. The whole of history, the whole of civilization couldn't have happened without the Battle of Marathon. There's loads more to say about that, but just bear with me and kind of hold that in mind. They're obsessed by the Battle of Marathon. So, I mean, this is a beautiful painting. It's presented at the Paris Salon, which is their big annual exhibition in Paris in 1890. And so this is the Coudet copy of it. And clearly, this painting, just every work of art I have found related to this story since pretty much relates back to this painting, I think. So the next one, and I came across this one only this weekend. I should say, finding these, Tim has helped me, but some of the others, like this one, it is finding needles in haystacks. There's an awful lot of Googling that has gone on before you find something like this. And then, of course, it's just like, oh my God, this is incredible. So it's basically exactly the same scene, whoopsie, if you have a look, except the shape of the laurel is different. Okay, but I mean, it's absolutely stunning. Sold at Christie's in 2007. If you've got it at home, I'd love to come and have a look at it. Even more importantly, though, we have this amazing sculpture by Jean-Pierre Cortot, which again looks like it's just reacting to the Coudet painting of 1819. He first presents this in plaster in 1822, and then he's commissioned to present it in he presents it in 1834 in the Louvre, where it remains there today. So Michel Bréal, father of the marathon, came up with the idea. Apparently, he's too busy to go to the Louvre and see this sculpture because he's stuck at home reading his Robert Browning, although Browning is 1879. And I've got nothing against Robert Browning, lovely man and great poet, but can we get him out of this story, please? So also just to the point about the marathon idea, in about 1880, you get these limited edition scale copies in bronze from a very prestigious bronze foundry in Paris, which come in four different sizes. They're all scale. So this is really doing the rounds in Paris in the 1880s as well. Just at the time, as I said, Bréal, he comes up with the idea for the marathon race in 1894. So this is a painting that Tim Rood has talked about in great detail. So I don't want to talk about it too much. And I heartily recommend his article in Cultural Responses to the Persian Wars. There's really interesting stuff in there about how this relates to the Battle of Waterloo and the anachronistic use of the Parthenon in the background there. It's obviously, we don't have the original painting again. This is just a print. So if you've got this painting at home, please let me know as well. So the Parthenon there is a commentary in Tim's view of the lack of a memorial for Waterloo, and particularly the Scottish Parthenon, which is still incomplete in Edinburgh. But what I want to point out here is we've got the love interest, but look, this time in her left arm, she's carrying an infant and she's got a little baby boy. So what's going on here? I think we have to think about the Napoleonic Wars. Huge and devastating loss of life. And I think surely this story is also being used at this time to reflect on that you can't have soldiers dying without having wives and children being bereaved at the same time. I also think surely seeing this really famous scene from Greek history, which probably didn't happen, but we're right in the middle of the Greek War of Independence, or we've just come out of it with Hayden in 1830, and we're coming into an independent Greece. And I can't imagine really that you're watching this. It's been made famous by Byron and all the rest of it. We're looking at this without perhaps having thought to the Greek War of Independence as well. So we get closer to our magic year of 1894, and this is the Prix de Rome. So guess what? It's in Paris, folks. In case you didn't know by now, this is the city in which Michel Bréal lives. the man who invented the marathon while he's reading Robert Browning. And so the Prix de Rome is a prestigious art prize each year. There's different categories. There's a history painting category, and there's a set topic. And the set topic in 1869 is the Soldier Marathon. So clearly, it's predominantly, I think, the Lucian version. You've got the magistrate sitting on a really weird kind of dice, which no ancient Greek magistrate probably ever sat on. I don't think, but there we go. I'll be correct on that. I'm not sure there's a love interest in this poem. This poem, I'm getting confused. In this painting, if you look further into the background near the big plinth there, there's a baby being held up. And if you've got any art historians, there's two more I'm about to show you with this baby being held up. I'd love to know what's going on there. I'm also interested in the soldier's nudity here. That is obviously his gown is kind of billowing and coming off. I wonder, Greek heroic nudity, but I wonder whether there's a kind of sense that he's an ancient athlete as well. They competed in the nude. And then, so also with manic Googling in the last few weeks, I found a whole load of other competition entries because this is like they all have to paint this scene. So this is the Meursault. So when I started Googling about Robert Browning or about Pheidippides, this came up as well. And it was this painting that got me thinking there's something more here because Meursault's painting is 10 years before Browning. So this is the Meursault. But look at this one. I prefer this one, honestly. This is if you're British and you're about to go to Calais, this is in the main art museum in Calais. And this is interesting. Look on the top right, you've got the baby being held up again. I've got no idea what that is. On the right, you seem to have the love interest, the horrified wife holding the baby. It looks to me very like the soldier is a kind of Christ-like figure, doesn't it? I mean, it almost looks like a crucifixion scene, looking up to the heavens. And I rather love the woman on the left in the kind of pink top, kind of leaning in, and she's sort of like, "Are you okay? Would you like a cup of tea or something?" He's like, "I'm dying." Anyway, I think this is terrific. This comes second in 1869. So again, just think, Bréal, presumably this is a really big arts and cultural event each year. Bréal's surely going to this. He's probably going to a posh reception and looking at all of these paintings and thinking about them. But, it's the water he swims in. So on the left here, we have the third place, clearly channeling the Coudet original painting, the lithograph I showed you. The two men looking up into the sky and pointing, and you've also got the soldier in a very similar situation. And look in the background, if you can see, right, the topmost figure in the background is a baby being held up. What's going on there? And then on the right, an unplaced one, sort of surrealist one here, but here you've got the love interest very clearly, and the baby. So the story's really moved. It's clearly telling different stories for its own contemporary time as well. This is good. Well, I'm conscious of the time. We'll just get to the Michel Bréal moment, I think, and then I'll kind of leave things for a conversation after that. So this one I came across. This is kind of manic Googling on a sort of sunny August evening last year. And looking through, something came up from the Ipswich Star newspaper, which even if you're British, you'll probably never have read. But if our overseas correspondents, Ipswich is a town in the wonderful county of Suffolk. And Frederick George Cotman was a Suffolk, there's a Cotman family of Suffolk painters, and he won a gold medal at the Royal Academy in 1873 for this painting, The Death of Euclides, which I wonder whether there's a kind of link to the Prix de Rome 4 years earlier, and you think, I'm going to paint that scene as well. Who knows? I think what I love about this painting is that it really gets why this scene appeals so much to artists. And as far as I'm aware, and I would love to be corrected, this scene now is by far the most common scene from the Battle of Marathon to be depicted in the 19th century. I've found, like, Zara is on the call with me, we were talking before, I found about two other marathon paintings from the whole 19th century. And this is the story that is kind of added in 600 years later. But what I love about this story is you've got, why does this story appeal so much? This painting, sorry. It's because it brings together two things. You've got joy and victory. So they're celebrating outside, but inside you have the soldier dying. You have the love interest, the wife again. And therefore inside you have the grief, the sacrificial death, the tragedy. And you get them, together. They're the same scene. And we are now in a world, obviously, where soldiers' bodies are coming home at the moment, and we're seeing this. And it is in the interests of countries to sort of say, if they win, yay, we won, isn't that amazing? But also, we have to honor the sacrifice. That is what Remembrance Day is all about. If you're British, Veterans Day, I think, in America. And I'm sure other countries have other versions of that. So I think this painting gets really well why this scene is so popular. Here's a bit of trivia for you. It was sold in 2009 at Sotheby's in London, and it was sold from the estate of none other than Gianni Versace. Look at that. Gianni Versace. And he had it in his villa in the north of Italy. And you would imagine that Gianni Versace's got a very good art advisor. And so clearly they thought this was a painting worth happening. Um, so there's a very funny thing I can show you in the chat afterwards that the Sotheby's description of this gets it completely wrong, just completely makes it up. Finds a general in Thucydides called Eucles, who's knocking around in about 44, who doesn't die in Thucydides at all, doesn't even come close to dying, and says that it's from that scene. It's absolutely rubbish. It's brilliant. Very funny. I can show you afterwards. Okay, so we're getting towards where I want us to get us to, and then we'll stop. So look at this. Look at this. I mean, this is incredible. So this is a German sculpture, probably the most well-known German sculpture um, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, by Max Kruse. So he first comes up with it in 1881, and I think again that might be in plaster. I'm not totally sure about that, but the sort of government then commissions him to produce it in bronze, and it sits outside the National Gallery of Berlin. And it's called the Messenger of Victory for Marathon. And this is it's up in various towns and cities. It's still up on the gable, I think, of the Theater des Westens. I apologize for my pronunciation there in Berlin. And this just leads to two cities where it's still up today. It's worth saying that Michel Bréal, who lives in Paris, spends most of his adult life in Paris. He's seen all of these things, but he's actually German by birth, and the early years of his life, his family is also German. And he spends postgraduate time studying in none other than Berlin. So do you think that possibly in the years between 1885, where it goes up in Berlin, and 1894, where he comes up with the idea, he may have gone to Berlin, probably very likely went to Berlin, but presumably, I'm going to be really facetious here that he's so busy reading his Robert Browning as he walks past the statue that he doesn't notice it. So here's a big slide, which is a bit of a place saver. This is my application for my next Herodotus Helpline talk. Where this story leads and where this sculpture by Kruse leads is astonishing. Some of you will know that the 1936 Olympics ended up being a Nazi propaganda Olympics, and there's a lot written about that. I don't really know where to start with this slide because it's not totally relevant to what I want to do tonight, but I do want to tell you a bit about it. So the gentleman here in the middle is Karl Diem, who's probably the most significant sports administrator in Germany in the 20th century. Initially Germany, then West Germany. He long predates the Nazis, and he's not a Nazi. He's working in German sports administration since 1908. He's a fanatical kind of classicist, but he's a very limited education in terms of classics. He leaves after middle school, and he relies for his education on a German Jewish archaeologist called Alfred Schiff. Now, Schiff digs at Olympia in the 1890s, and he's a big sportsman as well, and he ends up being a judge at the 1896 Athens Games. And basically, Schiff advises Diem in everything classical as far as we can see. I've had some really good conversations with the Diem archive in Cologne about this, and Natalie, who's on the call, we've been working together on that. In 1914, Diem writes a novella called Der Laufe von Marathon. I'm sorry for my pronunciation again, if that's not good. And this is his short story of the marathon runner story. The one, this is the hare that Roland has set running. And he publishes it in 1923. Now you can see here on the book on the left, you've got the Kruse statue. And Then in 1936, basically, Dean has to kind of face the regime and he has to kind of keep the regime happy. He's so obsessed by the Olympics, he'll do anything to keep the Olympic dream alive. And so on during the days of the Olympics in 1936 in Olympia Zeitung, which is the sort of official publication of the games, this story is serialized. And this is kind of the Nazi regime, but worse than that, um, in this version of it, Miltiades, who some of you know is the great general at Marathon, he is described as the Führer. Okay. Now, at the same time, Deem is protecting Schiff and looking after him. So he's kind of facing in both directions. He's a very controversial figure in Germany. There's so much more that I could say about this slide, and I'd love to come back probably when the book is done, because this is my next research project. And he's also the founder of the torch relay at these games, probably almost certainly with Schiff's help. And he's been written out. We have a German Jew possibly inventing the Olympic torch relay, certainly involved with it. And I think it all comes from the Crucis statue. Anyway, that was my place saver. That's also for chat. We're nearly there. So, this statue goes to Chicago in 1893. This is the year before the foundation of the Olympics, or the IOC, in Paris. And it goes, and I managed to find one of those wonderful moments. There's this newspapers.com. Oh my God, the fun you can have on newspapers.com. Amazing. Just going back, get yourself a subscription. You should find all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So the Inter-Ocean newspaper is one of the main Chicago newspapers in the late 19th century. And it reviews at this World Fair Crucis statue. And it says, Max Crucis, messenger for marathon, is exceedingly powerful. A runner at full speed, one hand clasping the laurel branch, which tells of victory, the other upon the heart, so soon to cease its beating. It is in bronze. The story every schoolboy knows of. That's going in my book. The messenger who falls dead when his work is done. And only a week or two ago, in conversation with the ex-head of the East German Olympic organization, I have been going in all sorts of weird places in the last few months, and he's a very nice man. He's pointed out this with Natalie's translation help, actually. Carl Diem in 1923. The runner became famous all over the world, and German boys must be familiar with his story if they do not wish to fall out with their history teachers. Oh, I like that as a teacher. That's strong, isn't it? Okay. So I've gone from a place where I started out with knowing about the Robert Browning poem, knowing, which I haven't talked about, knowing about the Meursault painting and thinking there must be more to this, to pulling all of this together. And there's much more I could go. I'm probably going to leave and we can talk about it in the chat. But essentially, when we then get to Michel Bréal, who is a brilliant man, a brilliant, brilliant man. And one of the things I'm really excited about in the book is no one knows this guy. Everyone knows Kukubitan, and there is a reason for that. Bréal doesn't have an ego. He's a modest, brilliant scholar, but a modest, good human being. De Coubertin, not so much. Sorry if you're a De Coubertin fan, but he gets very close to the Nazis. He's obsessively against female sport, whereas Bréal, amongst many other things, he is a leading advocate for girls' education in France in the 1870s, and actually is a founding governor of the first all-girls high school in Paris in 1881. So he's kind of the man you would want to come up with a marathon race, but he's not reading Robert Browning. He's swimming in this water where the marathon race is the story that every schoolboy knows, or you're reading it with mother, or you're walking around Paris and you've got all of these examples of it. And so to finish, really, what happens is after they found the IOC in June 1894, and then they go away and think, well, what events are we going to have? And it's actually in September, I think the 15th of September. He's on holiday in Switzerland and he writes a letter to de Coubertin, who's the IOC General Secretary at that point. And it's a kind of letter where he's ticking off a few points. It's a response to a letter we don't have that Coubertin sent him. And he's sort of like, okay, well done for doing this, and remember to speak to the Americans. And almost as an afterthought, at this point, I've put the French. I'm very grateful to Valerie for checking my translation here. But this is what he writes. Since you're going to Athens, see therefore if a race from Marathon to the Pnyx can be organised. This would have a flavour of antiquity. If we knew the time that the Greek warrior took, we would be able to establish the record. For my part, so he doesn't call him Pheidippides. For my part, I'd like to claim the honour of offering the cup of Marathon. So that is all we really have. We then have bits of correspondence and all the rest of it. He never explains why. And I think the answer for that, why, is obvious because he doesn't need to. Now that you see all of that evidence of how big this story is, we've just forgotten how massive, what a massive cultural thing this story is in the 1890s. He doesn't need to explain it. Everyone gets it straight away. So that ends with, and I'm going to end with this famous slide. I mean, I could spend the whole session talking about Spiros Lewis's win in 1896, which pretty much sets the Olympics on course. It's the Olympics, the first Olympics being successful, but this was just an absolutely incredible story. And it's very much, I mean, a whole load of things I haven't talked about, but it's very, very tied to Greek independence because running from Marathon to Athens to celebrate victory over the Persians is, of course, if you're a Greek in 1896, is running to celebrate kicking out the Ottomans. Of course it is. And of course, that's why Bréal would have thought this would work really well. It's an independence run. The 17 entrants, 4 foreigners and 13 Greeks. And for the first half, at least at the race, and I think probably more, quite a bit more, the 3 of the 4 foreigners in the lead. And then one by one, they drop out for various different reasons. And Lewis comes through, and the kind of description of the scene when he comes into the Panathinaike Stadium, rebuilt from antiquity, is just incredible. I see one. I think now. I mean, I'm a big cricket fan, but if there's one sporting event in history I'd want to go back and see, it's this. I just want to be in the stadium at the moment that Lewis wins that first marathon.